Hello. Welcome to the late night panel. We're going to talk about writing for a late night, which you all do. Great. So let's start at the very beginning. Growing up, what was all your relationships to late night television? Whoever wants to start first, you have to start first. You're next.
I'm trying to think. The first memory I have of late night TV is my brother and I trying to stay up late enough to watch SNL and mostly failing. Like we would around 10 o'clock start to drink a lot of soda and then start to try to scare each other to try to see if we could stay up until 11:30. But it just seemed like the coolest goal to try to it felt like you got to peek on the other side of this grown-up curtain if you could manage to stay up that late.
Yeah.
So that's probably my first relationship with it.
Anyone else have a specific show they watched?
I remember I discovered Conan in 7th grade, so I became obsessed with Conan O'Brien's show. I watched that whenever I could stay up late enough. And then also Saturday Night Live. I specifically watched, I liked the cheerleader sketches. I was at the point where I had certain sketches I liked, and I'd be like, ugh, boring, they're doing one of these right now. But, so I love the Spartan cheerleaders and Conan O'Brien. Those were and Letterman, I watched him too, specifically on Thanksgiving when he'd guess which pies his mom made. That was my favorite thing. So those 3 shows specifically I honed on to immediately.
Did any of you dream of working on late night?
No.
Well,
No further questions.
So no, I didn't. You spoke for.
Leave!
I did. So I started. My first late night that I loved was Saturday Night Live as well. And I remember Nancy Kerrigan is from my small hometown in Massachusetts, and she hosted after the Olympics. And I remember being like, "That's the coolest thing I've ever seen. She's from over there." And then I remember in high school being like, "Oh, The Daily Show. That's the shit." Can I swear?
I actually don't know.
Okay, I'll stop.
I heard a yes.
And just being like, that's the impossible dream of.
Yeah.
So I did starting then. I was like, well, that's the thing I would do if. But that's it felt like being like, that's what I'd do if magic were real, you know.
I feel like I didn't know that writers existed for other shows other than SNL. I knew who SNL writers were, and I knew who the hosts were of shows, and I just absorbed the taste that my parents had. So my parents loved SNL, they loved Conan, they loved Jon Stewart, and so those are the people who I looked up to. But it took a long time before I understood that comedy was a career at all, let alone writing for someone who's in front of camera. And I was a big time theater kid, and I was like, well, that's all nice, but I'm actually born for the stage. And so it took a while for me to come down off my high horse in that regard.
Yeah, I think comedy was born out of not being able to crack it on the Broadway stage. But no, comedy and knowing about late night, is this on? Knowing about comedy was, I think, such social capital early on. When I wasn't being very well received in middle school, I remember coming in and being like, "Have you guys seen this Will Ferrell guy? He's got something going on." And I remember that being very sort of formative, was realizing that this was this thing that everyone, regardless of who they were, could identify with and relate to.
When I was in high school, I watched the Colbert Report all the time, every single day of my life. And I was like, I can't believe you can say all these bad words on television. How do I get that job? So I've always kind of wanted to say bad words on television. And I'm really lucky that I get to do that.
I'm sure there are people here who would love to be the people on stage. So how did you get the job that you have? And it may be a quick show of hands, which one of you started stand-ups, hands raised, and then which are improv sketch? Ooh. All right, so, but beyond that, what are sort of your paths or specific anyone's path to the jobs they currently have?
I got hired before having any sort of representation or anything like that. So my path was, I think, probably similar to a lot of people on this stage. It was through the group of people that I met that also had the same dreams. Doing sketch and just taking as many classes as I could, doing as much performance as I could, writing as much. You just meet other people who work really hard, who you get along with, and we sort of became a support group and still are for each other. And you know, one of them writes for your show. And you know, if somebody found out about a packet, we'd all do that packet. We'd all read each other's stuff. You know, it's a lot of hustle, but that's the hustle that it takes to get this sort of job, especially if you don't have traditional routes available to you.
Yeah, I think I got my job off of a packet, which is like an application, essentially. You write a specific sample for the specific show, ideally. You aren't just like recycling jokes. And it's always reflective of what the show is going to be. So, you know, if it's a show like Fallon where there are monologue jokes and desk bits and sketches, that's part of the packet. But something like Sam Bee, I had to write a what we call a headline script, which is like a script. It's actually very smart. It's a script based off of a headline about the Charlottesville the Unite the Right March, which is uplifting and fun. And
Woo!
And so you do a ton of packets, and I think I applied for every show that everyone writes for except for Seth Meyers because they weren't interested. And you do a ton of packets, and you kind of, as you're doing the packets, you're like, God, this is like pulling teeth. If I get this job, that'll probably be really hard for me. And usually those packets aren't as strong. And then hopefully the packet where you're like, God, this is really, I get the voice of this host. I like this subject matter. I like the point of view. This isn't like a huge stretch where I have to put my voice through a machine for the host to be able to say it on the other side. And that's how I felt doing Sam's packet. And I was just very lucky that I ended up being read and that they liked the packet.
I did a lot of packets as well, but I think the most helpful thing for me for getting into late night was actually the internet, shout out. Because I would this dude, when I was in college, someone encouraged me to just tweet, and this was when I had 100 followers and no one cared and no one liked anything I said, and it was really actually pathetic. I can't believe I continued to do it for years. Feel bad for me. But eventually I built a following on Twitter, and I was able to connect with Robin Thede, who was my first late night boss, and then Desus Mero. I connected with them through Twitter. And years ago, I would email them and be like, hey guys, if you ever need a writer, I'd love to do it. And they would ignore my emails. But then eventually I got this job. So email people.
Yeah, I think for me it's the same. I was doing stand-up, improv, and sketch. And one of my friends on my sketch team found out the Daily Show had a packet, and he knew that, he and I were both in a group of friends just doing packets and interested in practicing monologue jokes. And so I got the packet, sent it in, not even knowing if they'd read it, because I wasn't they didn't send it to me. I just kind of stole it. And so luckily they did read it, and then that's how I got hired. But that was after doing many other packets for all your shows as well.
I want to talk about a typical day, but considering you guys all work in different jobs with different schedules, I want to try something which I think might be a disaster, but I'm going to go through windows of times, and then you'll all say what happens in the window at times on your show on show nights. So
At the same time?
Well, not exactly that, in an order.
Very jazzy.
Because some of your shows are daily, in the title daily, and some of them are weekly, and currently Desus is bi-weekly. So
Weekly or double the weekly?
Double the weekly. Yeah.
double the weekly. So we're gonna go.
Weekly. Yeah. Can we steal that?
So we'll go in order how a day goes. So the mornings, when you get in, are you sort of looking at news immediately? Is there a pitch meeting in the morning? You can go first since you're next to me.
On Monday morning at 9:30, we go around the room and we each pitch one topical thing, kind of based off the news of the weekend. And then I'm on the monologue team, so immediately then I start trying desperately to generate enough monologue jokes to turn in at our first deadline.
I go to the bathroom, and then at 10 a.m. is when our meeting starts, and that's when we watch news clips of all the major stories happening that day, and we're encouraged to riff and make jokes in the room. Some of those might end up making it to the show or kind of get an idea for where we want to go with it. And so that meeting after that is when Trevor goes in a room and with other people, producers and stuff, and kind of really picks, okay, this is what the show is going to be about today.
We have monologue bits due in the morning, so that's when we do sketches, games, anything that relates to the news of from we taped the last show until the morning. So that's usually what we're spending most of our morning thinking about.
I defer to Ziwe.
I'm Ziwe. So I get in at 10 because I don't like to be nervous for our meeting at 10. I don't like to be late for our meeting at 10:30. At 10:30 we meet and we talk about the topical things. But really any kind of news that just floats our boat, it's very expressive. What, would you agree, Josh? I feel like, so Josh is my boss technically, so I'm shuddered right now. I'm very nervous, very stressed, and if you guys could support me with more laughter, that would be great.
You can see I have 2 iron fists, so it's a real rough place in the Desus Mero writers' room. I will say the only thing I would change is that on show days we start a little early, so we're in at 9 for like a meeting that's like, okay, is there any story that we want to boot from the lineup that we'd come up with the previous day's afternoon, or is there anything that we want to add that we kind of felt bubbled up overnight that feels more contemporary?
And shows are Monday and Thursday, 11 p.m. on Showtime.
Like, has she been missing the 9 a.m. meetings and you've never told her?
No, Ziwe and I are both like compulsively early arrivals.
Yeah, I get so stressed.
At the late show, our day starts at either 8:30 or 9, depending on the day. And we actually have 2 pitch meetings in the morning. One is a smaller pitch meeting with our head writers, and then we have a larger pitch meeting with Stephen.
Our show, as I'm sure you all know, is on Wednesdays. So our week is kind of bisected in that way. Monday and Tuesday are working on one half of the show, and Thursday and Friday are working for preparing for the next week's show. So on Monday, we come in, I am 10 minutes late every day. It doesn't matter what I do or how hard I try, I'm in at 10:10, which is perfect because our first meeting's at 10:15. And that's a studio meeting, which is all of the writers, Sam, our research team, our segment producers. Essentially, it's everyone on staff who doesn't work for the digital team and who doesn't do the field pieces. And that's when we're trying to figure out what we call the Wednesday version of whatever the big story is, because all of the daily shows are going to be working on a tight turnaround. So it's like, we know what the conversation is today. What are we going to be, what's the most topical thing to talk about on our show on Wednesday? And what's the approach on Wednesday that's not going to feel old?
For the shows that have monologues, is everyone sort of everything? It's like, are you a monologue writer, but ultimately you also do the other stuff, or is it completely?
Our show is everyone is everything, but I know that's somewhat atypical.
Oh, sorry.
No, please.
Thank you.
So welcome.
I'm with her. I'm with
We have
her.
a monologue team and a sketch team, but the most recent hires, like maybe the last 3 or 4 writers were hired, they kind of tried hiring us as like swings. So we have a couple people who can just kind of like float around and do whatever strikes their fancy.
We have monologue at The Tonight Show. We have monologue and sketch writers. But monologue bits is sort of like a grab bag term for sort of like anything that sort of falls somewhere in between, anything that you sort of have an idea that won't fit into a joke. So.
And ours is a little different because we have the correspondence as well, which is like Roy Wood Jr., Michael Costa. We have like 6 different correspondents. So they might do a chat we call them chats, with Trevor at the desk. So we'd have the headline plus maybe an Act 2 chat, or sometimes even like a pre-taped sketch, but everyone does everything, so it just depends on what you're needed on that day.
I was gonna then go to after lunch, but while we're here, what do you guys usually eat for lunch?
Our lunch is free. We get free lunch every day, which is awesome. So it's catered.
Do you get to choose it, or it's just whatever shows up?
It's whatever shows up, but they always have a good variety. Like there's always a good vegetarian option, a good meat option, a salad, a soup, and a dessert, and a fruit platter, which I never touch.
Then follow up, are you guys hiring?
Yeah. Not currently.
Okay, good. Okay,
But,
that's cool. I was asking
yeah.
for a friend.
I can sneak you in during lunchtime.
We have free lunch every Monday and Thursday, which is second place to 4 days a week. Oh, and Fridays.
Pizza Party Fridays.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we
Pizza
have
Party Fridays.
actually very great food moments, but they're really expressive because we have a nutritionist, so so they make sure we're healthy. But we have Pizza Fridays. But otherwise, I go to Hudson Market.
Yes,
And
Hudson
we-
Market.
On show days, we eat after the taping because we tape at like 12:30, and so because the edit is really intensive on Desus Mero, and so like we'll do the taping and then we have lunch, which I think is a little atypical.
Yes, we also have donuts for breakfast on Mondays and
donut
Thursdays.
Mondays and Thursdays.
Yeah, we're like we just like food.
Yeah, our stuff. The thing that characterizes us is being inches from death. That's the commonality.
Yeah, our food is every man for themselves. Fuck you. Oh, we said we might not cuss. Sorry. Pretend like it's on TV and it got bleeped. Bleep. Thank you. You have lunch that's catered on show days because we eat in the rewrite room on show days. But yeah, you either can order something delivered or you can do something called cooking and packing a lunch. I'm not familiar, but we are in the same building, so Hudson Market is also a frequent destination if I want to get outside air. Again, whatever that is.
And
You guys have eaten lunch before, right? Like, you guys know how it works.
Jesse, what do you eat for lunch?
Yeah, what's your diet like? We have a nutritionist.
Salad sometimes.
Okay.
There's a salad place in the office.
And what time is that usually happening?
I eat really early because I don't eat breakfast, so I eat lunch around 11.
Got it.
Do
Wow.
you eat it all at once, or do you kind of pick? Is it like a...
No, I eat it all at once.
What do you do at 3 p.m.?
I can kind of coast if things are going all right. And then I'll eat dinner at like 6. And then I'll be, not that hungry.
No late night snack?
Yeah.
No, like...
Food.
You have more questions for us?
No, that was kind of it. So, lunch ends. What do you do from after lunch to pre-show? What is the sort of process that? Are you sort of rewriting? Is it sort of just news come in waves and you sort of recirculate? What is the sort of next push of a day?
We have a rehearsal every day at 4:15, and we turn in a last batch of monologue jokes at 3:15, and then someone at our show goes and gets a bunch of tourists from the NBC gift shop at our building, and we ask them if they want to see a taping, and they're from like Holland, so they're like, okay, like they have no idea what's going on, and like 40 of them come into our studio, and then Seth reads like 30 monologue jokes to them, and we only need about 10 to make a monologue, and so we basically choose our monologue jokes based off of the reactions of a bunch of Republicans from
Holland.
Australia, yeah, exactly, Holland. And then we'll like read like other sketches that Seth is doing. We'll read it too. So that's kind of like what we're doing pre-taping is kind of like a little bit of a dry run and trying to guess off of those people's reactions what our audience's reaction might be.
We rehearse at 3:30 every day, and we don't bring any audience in. It's just like people who wrote on the piece and producers, and then like the camera crew guys. And usually if we can make the camera crew laugh because they like haven't been involved in the process at all, then we know the joke is good. And then after that we go into rewrite, which can last from 4 to 6 depending on how much. And you're in the rewrite room if you were assigned to that piece that day. So you're just kind of in a small room with Trevor, the head writers, the producers. We just project the script up onto the wall and we just rewrite it all together.
The writers on our show, something interesting is they're also the producers of those sketches. So depending on the day, it can be really different. Some days you're helping out with someone else's, they need some more jokes for something, and sometimes it's a crazy mad dash to pull something together at the last minute. One thing that Jimmy's really great at is doing impressions. So if there's something ridiculous that happens to someone the night before, we will often hear, oh, he's interested in doing an impression of this person. And it's kind of surreal how in a few hours the props and the costume team can turn around these full replicas of sets and hair pieces and sometimes prosthetics. So that's sort of, if you are responsible for that sketch, you're spending a lot of that day sort of pulling that all together.
I once again defer to Ziwe.
I'm Ziwe. I'm a black woman. So wait, what's the question again?
We're just talking about now pre-show.
Pre-show. Yeah, they're live to tape for a lot of it.
Yeah, I mean we don't rehearse.
We don't rehearse.
And because so much of our show is improvised by the hosts on the stage. So so much of what gets done pre-show, whether it's like writing graphics into jokes or figuring out the arc of the piece, will get done during the tapings while we're watching, being like, okay, like I think we might be the only show that the writers are like, while the hosts are talking, are like writing down like, oh, there should be a graphic here, and then the graphics team makes it and they all get dropped in post, instead of like at other jobs where you write it and it accompanies the joke. We have to hear what the joke is first.
Yeah, they're driving the machine.
Yeah,
for sure.
And we're kind of trailing behind it, picking up the like in the Mad Max wake.
Exactly. It's just like Mad Max.
Yeah. We've got Mad Max on our show. Yeah. So, sorry, I did a bad job of deferring.
Boo him.
Our show's a little split in the afternoons. Half of the writers usually end up working on like long-term pieces or field stuff or guest stuff, and then the other half focus on rewriting the show for that day. But we also are we try to have the show be as current as it possibly can be, considering it tapes at 5:30 or 6. So if something happens in the news, which happens more and more, if at 3:30 Trump's pants fall down, then everyone will get called off of what they're working on to write on that, because that's the big thing. So that it should be uncommon, but it happens a lot.
So on days preparing for the show, on this hypothetical Monday, we were given an assignment for what the act one, the most topical act of the show would be, and it was due at 5 p.m. The night before the show. We did a table read, and then on a show day, we have a rehearsal at 12:30. It is not an audience, just writers, segment producers, and that ends around 1. And then we go into Sam's dressing room, and we have a rewrite from 1 to 4:15, and that's a real the night before we may have had kind of bigger structural notes, like I'm not sure that this argument is coming across correctly, or this part feels redundant, or something like that. And then I think this is probably borrowed from The Daily Show, because that's where Sam and all of our EPs came from as well. We project it up on a screen, and it's a real line-by-line rewrite, but typically what the main goal of our rewrite is to cut time out of the show. Usually we're running over by about 8 minutes.
The one really nice thing about not rewriting is that we're never driven by Trump news. So if he does anything crazy like fall off a bridge, we're never there's no hustle for that. The show is what the show is that morning. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then are you all watching the show, or by the time the show's happening, or moving on to the next day?
Once the script is locked, which is about half an hour before taping, we're allowed to leave. But usually, if you wrote something that day and you're excited to see if a joke works, a couple of us will hang out and watch it together, depending on just what's on the show that day.
Show day is the most exciting day of my week. It's so exciting. I actually love watching the show because I just get to hear these masters riff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For sure. So we have to be very present. All the writers are at the taping, because stuff kind of gets sculpted afterwards. Mm-hmm. And it's very fun.
Same as Kat for us. If you want to stick around, you can, but once the script is locked and we leave Sam's dressing room, recently there was a study that said that if you're in a conference room for 2 hours or more, the CO2 levels start to rise, and it impacts your brain function. And I've never felt more sure of a study without having any idea how science works, because after 4 hours in a dressing room, you feel very depleted and kind of crazy. And sometimes you've had to really go to bat for certain things, which is encouraged at our show, to really fight to keep something in, or make an argument against something as well. And so if you're really proud of something, maybe you'll stick around for the taping, but 3 of our writers schedule therapy to be right after that. Not so much that it's a devastating time, but just that there are so few hours in your day that are office hours that are open, and so any opportunity where you can kind of get something done when a doctor is around is really wonderful.
You're all writers and artists in your own right, but obviously, but these are shows with the names of the hosts in the title, how do you sort of balance trying to be expressing yourselves with sort of the job of saying a thing that someone else is going to say, and if you have any examples of like getting something on, you're like, that's me, and I'm happy that that's out there.
I think the coolest challenge, I don't know if you guys feel this way, but I think what I like about writing for late night is this really neat exercise of trying to find the sweet spot of marrying your voice and the host voice. Because you don't want to write where it's like not something you care about or you believe and you're just doing an impression of someone, but it also can't sound too much like you. So I think that challenge and that kind of like constant intellectual exercise is what I like the most about it. But I do feel like I wrote every once in a while I think like your voice like sneaks through, and I wrote a monologue joke not too long ago, and then I had the show tweeted it, and then I got screenshots from other people being like, was this you? It was about white men not being great, so that's pretty on brand for me. But yeah, so I feel like every once in a while, I'm sure that's happened. Every once in a while, you're like, that's very me, and anybody who knows me would know that that is about me. But yeah, I think that's like kind of neat trying to find that intersection.
Yeah, it would be a much harder job if I didn't feel like I had overlap in the Venn diagram of my voice and Sam's voice. It's already hard enough to convert the news into jokes. Then you're already putting your voice through a machine. There are certain things that Sam, pet peeves she has with way that sentences are constructed or ways that she talks, and the more longer you do it, like the more you get their voice in your head and you know what they would say and what they wouldn't say. But I don't know. I mean, for me, I'm just always trying to push our show as far left as possible. And I feel like I'm just always like being like, let's do something really socialist. And so, we've had a lot of pieces that I feel proud of that have been like about like the Green New Deal or universal childcare, things like that, Sam being from Canada is like, oh yeah, I forget that we don't have that stuff here. And I always feel proud when I feel like I've pushed the show's voice into something that like I believe that maybe someone else wouldn't have pitched in the room.
Sorry. So no, I was just gonna say for us, the voice is interesting because like you might switch from like writing for Trevor's voice on the headline one day, and then like this week I did a piece for Lewis Black, who's a 60-something-year-old very angry white man. So it's been a really cool exercise for me, and I also like that our show doesn't be like, okay, I'm a white girl, I can only write for Desi. Like I've written pieces for all of the correspondents, contributors, and Trevor. So it's been really cool, and I like that they also trust us that we're like good enough writers that we know this voice would do this voice would do that, and Trevor's good at knowing, okay, this is a joke I can't tell, but this is a joke like Dulce can tell. So you're kind of shifting every day, and you have to shift quickly from one voice to another, but kind of like Jenny was saying, your voice is always, it's in there somewhere. Like I get friends who text me if there's a poop joke on the show, and they assume that was me.
I like what Nicole, I'm sorry. No, go for it. I like what Nicole said about like when you said that like you feel like proud when you know that you brought something in that maybe somebody else wouldn't have thought of. And I feel like there's a lot of talk about like diversity in writers' rooms, and I think people think of it just in terms of like, obviously you want to have like a diverse representation, but I think it's not just for the sake of like numbers or like, I think it's like that you feel like it's that there's only a limited number of headlines we're all looking at every day, and different people are going to see different openings in those headlines based on their life experience. And I think that that's what like you want, like I feel like our, like the writers' rooms I've been in that I enjoy the most are when like, oh, I looked at that story for 2 hours today and tried to think of a joke, and I didn't even, not even that I couldn't find a good joke, I didn't even look at it the way that you were looking at it. I didn't even think of the issue that climate change article or that article about affirmative action or healthcare made you think of because of all the steps you took to get to this writer's room. So I think like those are the best days when you're like, oh, that person brought their whole self to the room, and now we all benefit from it.
Writing for Desus Mero is so fun. I find them to be like really bombastic. So when like I wrote the Green Book sketch, which is like,
that was awesome. You wrote that?
Yeah, I wrote that shit.
God, I don't know why we're not all clapping.
Oh goodness. Why would you do that? Stop clapping. But to me, that was just the most expressive I've ever felt, because I wouldn't normally joke about like the N-word and like jokes I necessarily tell, but like through them, I get to have this new perspective, and there's this new world of like really ultra offensive, like really smart satirical jokes. So writing with them, I think, is fantastically fun.
They have like a real wide strike zone for
Yeah.
stuff they're willing to do, because they're so smart and so silly that like the breadth of references is like totally bonkers and really fun to like get to pitch them stuff in all different walks of life. And I personally like making them like react to like just real dork stuff.
Totally.
Or like sneaking in. Each story of the show has like a title card that's some kind of pun or just like little joke, and like the dumber and more intricate the pun the more intricate the pun, the better I feel about myself. Where I used to work at Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and then I took great pride in the dumbest jokes I could get. There was a joke that I wrote last year. I don't even remember the setup, but the punchline was John in kind of like a surly Brooklyn accent saying, "Suck my dog dick." And I was like, I've done it. I've earned my pay this week.
Yeah, dude. It's so fun.
Jenny, you spoke about diversity in writers' rooms. So, Josh, I gotta ask, what's it like being a straight white man in late night?
Very white guy of you to center me in this conversation, Jesse. I will defer to Ziwe. Yeah, Ziwe. Ziwe, what's it like for me to be a straight white guy in a writer's room?
As a black woman, I would say that your experience is fine. You don't get bullied enough, but you do get bullied sometimes.
I do get bullied some. Yeah. No, I think it's I've had a wonderful experience overall.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
I think like.
Yeah, what are you gonna say, Josh?
I think like everyone here, there are ups and downs and excitements and setbacks, but I think I've had probably of this panel like a singularly privileged and straightforward time of it. Yeah.
Good answer. No, but I think more seriously, in the past year, you've had a lot of sort of late night writer shows canceled that were fronted by women. Busy Phillips, Sarah Silverman, Michelle Wolfs, Robin Thede, where you work, Ziwe. I guess the question is, what the hell? Why? What is? If you were to say what the problem is, besides the obvious, why is it a problem?
I'll voice a little pet peeve I have writing for a woman-fronted show, which is whenever a new woman-hosted show comes onto the scene, it only gets talked about in context of Full Frontal. It's always like, it does this, and Full Frontal does this differently. You know, Busy's on a couch, and Sam stands. Like, real deep comparisons that are really thought-provoking and important. And it's frustrating for there to be a separation just in the general conversation when you're talking about what the late night sphere is like, who is talking and what do they have to say. With the exception of Robin's show, which had like in 20-something episodes in the first season.
24 episodes.
Yeah, like Michelle Wolf had 10. Busy had 4 episodes a week, but only for a few months. People need time to figure out. Late night is a machine. It's everyone does it a little differently, as you could hear, and I think that people who write for these shows, especially who were there from the beginning, like Kate and Jenny, like it takes time to get settled. It takes like a while, and I think that people are kind of impatient. They expect for a woman to have like this unique and immediate spot where they totally understand what they're doing, which in my opinion, in the case of like Busy and Robin, they did. Like I thought from the get-go those shows were really unique and excellent, but I think people just kind of evaluate it in a different sphere, which is a bummer.
Yeah, and I think if we learned anything from the election, our country is still way more misogynist than we might want to admit. And people bring that to female comics, like I know some people do stand-up, like just doing stand-up too, like, women's voices were really shrill. People don't want to hear them. That's just like, there's still, I think, an aversion to a woman who's trying to be funny. people, like, they use that word try. Like, there's a baseline assumption a man's gonna be funny, and yet for some reason women still have to prove themselves that they can be funny. They're not just automatically accepted as funny. So I think women hosts just have a harder job to get the viewership and to like get a fair shot. I just think the audience, there's a lot of even subconscious misogyny that people may not even be aware of that they have when they view these shows. Because I think a lot of them probably came down to like, I mean, ratings and numbers. If people weren't watching them, then that usually leads to cancellation. So I think, you know, people should watch those shows and support them if you want them to keep being on TV.
I think there's also this false and frustrating concept that there's lady news and there's just news, and it all impacts everybody. Like, I pitch on sports constantly for my show because that's what I know a lot about. If we had to pitch something about The Bachelor or Bachelorette, I would not know. There's a Rachel probably, I don't know. I don't know anything about those shows or things that are considered like the lady subjects. So I think there's still even then when those shows do get a chance, they're evaluated again by a different criteria, because it's like, well, this is where I'll get my lady topics, and then I'll get everything else from the neutral, which is male. And it's you know, so let's fix that and then we'll be fine.
I know a lot about The Bachelor and Real Housewives. I wear a lot of pink. I'm not wearing pink today, but I love feminine stuff. I think that late night reflects the world we live in. How many women CEOs are there, right? It's not like this is some digression in society. So I think it's reflective of that. I think we need more shows led by women that are different in every way. Some can be super pink and about Bachelor. Some can be about sports. It doesn't really, we just need more opportunities for women, and we don't need to pigeonhole ourselves in this world where it's like, you have to be a certain accessible self, like you have to be your true self, and that's all you can do as a performer and a writer. And that'll connect with people, but women need to be given those opportunities to make shows.
Donald Trump is the president.
What?
I know, it's crazy. He's a uniquely difficult person to make fun of in so much as he is so apparently what he is, and the exact same way over and over again. Your different shows are differently political, but you all are dealing with that. How do you personally approach it? How do you feel your shows approach it? How do you hope to continue approaching it as we sort of look into the next election?
I'll say one thing that's been fun and kind of refreshing for The Daily Show is that since Trevor's not American, like he's not a Democrat, he's not a Republican, so it's kind of nice that we don't really take a side, because he always wants to like learn as much as he can about every side of all the issues. Of course, we tend to lean toward the Democratic Party because they're not monsters, but it is like, but he very much is like, you know, he's super smart and knows a lot more about American politics than a lot of Americans, but he's still always like, tell me both sides. What are the Democrats doing? What are Republicans doing? And we write our script like, we never say like we or us. If Trevor's speaking, he'd say Americans. So it's kind of nice being able to have that distance and see his perspective of not being so deep in it, like as someone who's been like, you know, raised as a Democrat, to actually be like, oh, right, yeah, maybe I'll sit back and look at both sides with him too, make sure I'm not being biased and we're all being objective as we like approach Trump and what's happening in the news.
I feel like it's
No, please.
I feel like it's really easy. Trump is so many things, and I'm not going to say anything groundbreaking here because he's everywhere, and we think about it. It's hard to not think about him all the time. But I think that there's two levels of Trump. I think there is like the stuff where he like had toilet paper stuck to his shoe, and look, the wind blew his hair. And then there's his really insidious immigration policies and him trying to roll back protections for LGBTQ people. And I think I feel like we're all trying at my job, and I'm sure like other places it's easy to get caught up in the toilet paper on the shoe, and I'm not saying I haven't written a joke about it, but I think like every once in a while I try to like recenter and be like, well, what is it that I really, if I've got airtime and I can put a joke on TV, what do I want to try to write the joke about? And there was like the weekend that Michelle Wolf hosted the Correspondents' Dinner, and everybody got really upset about her eyeshadow joke, and spent 48 hours talking about that. But at that same weekend, Trump held a rally where he asked if there were any Hispanics in the room, and then he goes, okay, good. And I thought, ooh, I happen to be Hispanic, and I thought, my weekend is about that. That's scary to me, and that's real. And so like I came in on Monday and wrote a piece about it because I thought like, ooh, let's try to keep our eye on the ball.
What do you guys hope as we go into the next election? And you, I mean, in many ways, it started with the 20 whatever Democratic nominees. What do you hope from your shows, or just in general late night, as we try to cover another election, especially learning what we learned from the last election?
So I think part of my self-care is that as a Black woman, I don't like to think about Trump. And that's the nice thing about working at Desus Mero is that we don't necessarily think about Trump that often. And when it comes to the election, we have candidates on our show, and it's like Cory Booker dunking on Desus Mero, which is light and fun and not too in the weeds of, tragedy.
I completely agree with that. I think there's something really very cool and privileged about a position where you're able to really bring some name recognition and some light to people's policies. And it does sometimes feel like giving people a little bit of vegetables with their dinner. But there's something really fun about being able to show a different side of a candidate or introduce people to a candidate in a way that maybe involves more penis jokes than a debate usually would, but can really also give a candidate a chance to express their policies and how they feel about different issues, and sometimes even where they stand relative to other candidates.
And just more people in the news gives you more fodder to talk about. Because again, the thing about Trump is that he's actually a very repetitive subject to write about. It's all, like, the policies may change, the people around him may change, but like the subject-wise, it can all be very, very much the same. It's a straight line. There's not a lot of hills and valleys to him. So having, it's just a delight to be in election season because there's just a slate of new people with varied funny things about them that you can finally, kind of stretch yourself a little bit in a fun way.
I wouldn't call writing about the election season a delight, but I would say that there's something very cool about writing for TV. I love my job. I love that I get to, instead of putting things on Twitter, I get to put things in Sam's mouth. Sam is someone who people listen to, and she's someone who is open-minded and willing to hear what her staffers care about and be be like, yeah, okay, let's do that. Like, I had pitched something after the abortion policies went through in Alabama and Georgia of like a sex ed for senators thing, and we completely scrapped what we were working on to do kind of like literally an explainer on what abortion is. And I don't know that any other host would have felt comfortable doing that, and I don't know if Sam would have thought that she would be, but in the moment it was like, yeah, I'm being sold on this, let's do it. And I think that I watched the last election not having a job and not having a voice, and I don't know what I want out of the show's coverage for the election, but I know that on the day-to-day I get to participate in that, and that's the most exciting thing, to be I'm one of those people who gets to pitch a point of view and have an opinion.
All your shows are different in some different days a week, or some are more political or less political. As we wrap up, what is a late night show for any of you in 2000, whatever year this is? What does it mean for a show to be a late night show? I mean, some people are watching it in the morning or a week later. What is late night?
I mean, we kind of grapple with that too, because it does seem like a lot of my friends say they watch the show, but they're watching it on YouTube on their morning commute. We now have a podcast edition too, where you can listen to the show. I mean, I do think there is something nice about a show that, it does air late at night. That's how the Emmys define it. So that's how we care about it. But I do think the world is digesting it differently, and it does seem to be, it used to be are you talking about politics? But there's other shows, like Desus Mero, you guys are not necessarily talking about Trump and politics and doing different things. So I think it's just something topical. I think people do tune in, though. If something happens in the news, they go to these late night shows to hear what we're going to say about them. So I do think there's an element to that people kind of want to use you to reflect on the world. It helps them absorb what's happening in the world if they're able to hear someone else's take on it that's a little lighter and funnier and easier to digest.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about female hosts and things like that, it's well, we have always defined what a late night show is based on what these male-fronted late night shows that were, every night. Summary at the end of the day, there's a guest, there's a monologue, there are desk bits, there are sketches, it's personality driven, that's the way that late night has been defined in the past, and I think that all it really has to be is like some type of personality talking about some type of culture. Usually, to me, the reason why a late night show is different than like a daytime talk show is that it's not as news is breaking. It's like at the end of the work day, there's some type of summary feel to it. I think it's a very broad umbrella, and there are so many shows that fit that people don't necessarily consider to be like a straight late night show. But yeah, to me, it's like kind of who cares? If you want to call your show a late night show, then great, I'll write a packet for it.
Yeah. No, I was just saying the way that we sort of talk about it in our writers' room is that we're an extension of the conversations people were having that day. So it's not that we're those conversations tend to be political right now, but they don't necessarily. It's not prescriptive. They don't have to be. We talked about that insane helicopter rescue where the woman spun out of control, right? Because that's what people. If you have not watched the video, you must. She's fine. You can laugh at it. It is so funny. But that's what people were talking about that day. We were like, this is all over the internet. The video's amazing. And she's okay, which means we get to talk about it. So,
she's dead, you don't get to talk about it.
That's the rules of comedy.
That's what would be sad about that. That's what would be sad. But yeah, so it tends to be political, but again, it's whatever that national conversation is.
I also think there's I think piggybacking off what Nicole said, it's comedy forward, I think is something I like about the late night genre. A daytime show is conversational, and I feel a little more encumbered by politeness of who's watching this? It's probably people folding laundry, and you know what I mean? Or people, whatever. There's just a politeness to it, and I kind of like that we have a little more freedom to react to things in an uncouth way that would be a little weird for Michael Strahan to do at noon or whatever, or Kelly Ripa to Kelly Ripa being bleeped left and right.
And with Desus Mero, I kind of see it as this deconstruction of late night, actually. And so it has a typical structure, you have the space for the headline or the monologue, then you have the field piece, then you have maybe a sketch, and you have the good night. But then it's still doing it in this revitalizing way where it feels totally fresh, because they're literally making it up on the spot with the machinations of the late night runs with a scripto, you use the program with the teleprompter and you talk about it, So that's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to turn it over to some questions from the audience. Thank you for those who wrote said questions. What was your hardest episode to write for?
The day after the election. We all walked in the day after the election and then hugged each other. I know. And then I just remember looking at my screen and trying to formulate a joke of any kind. Our head writer, Alex Bays, wrote my favorite monologue joke that day. The joke was Donald Trump was elected the 45th president of the United States, and then something punchline. He was what he typed, because I felt yeah, man, what do you say about that? I would love to hear the punchline. I don't know what it is. So yeah, I wrote all of my monologue. This has never happened before. I had a whole week where all of my monologue jokes that whole week were rejected because everything was so angry. And then the last day of the week, I got one in, and it was about a monkey who'd had a boob job. I did not know how to write yet about a new reality.
I think week 3 of the Kavanaugh stories were really tough for me. We're a show that's our bread and butter. We feel an obligation, and we're passionate about it and angry about it. But also it's not, there aren't a ton of men hosts who maybe feel super comfortable talking from that perspective. So around week 3, my boss, Melinda, we had a just meeting. She was like, hey, Nicole, can you hang back for a second? And I was like, oh, this is amazing, actually, because I'm about to get fired. And she was like, yeah, I just wanted to ask, are you okay? And I was like, oh, you can tell. And she was like, yeah, you seem like you're doing bad. And I was like, yes, I am. But the way that we kind of describe it on our show is you have you have like a cycle of like exhaustion and feeling burnout with politics and feeling like you can't make a joke and you don't know how you're going to go forward. And it's just when you're at your low point, someone else is feeling like more energized and your cycles don't sync up. And that's what's really beautiful about being part of a staff.
Yeah, I think
We all get our period at the same time though.
Yeah, I'm cycled up with Trevor.
I think I was just gonna say I think when something really sad happens, when when there's something that you don't joke about, whether it's like a tragedy or I think those are the times when I've found that I have a lot of trouble because I don't have a point of view, I don't have a take. It's just sad, and those are I think the moments when it's a little tricky to realize that what your job is often to put people to bed that night with a smile on their face and to make them feel some degree of joy. And I think that's something that's when it becomes really hard, and when I think we hope to rise to the occasion, because those are the times when people really need to laugh.
There were just two. My very first day was right after the Charlottesville Nazi rally. That was like my day one of work. So like going in being like, I don't know what you guys want me to do with this. And then the second one, kind of similar to what you were talking about, was the Las Vegas shooting. Those are like the 2 days that stand out to me as we all walked in being like, what the fuck are we gonna write today? Like, because there's certain things you just can't make fun of and you can't find the funny in it, and they're just so devastating.
The hardest day of work for me was really tragic. It was the day that we didn't put Beyonce's Homecoming in the monologue. And that was so hard for me, because as a Beyonce stan, I was like, wow, you don't respect my culture. And that's the wild thing about the show that we write on, is that we kind of acknowledge the world is ending, YOLO. So, like, you get over it. You know, it's all what bliss is ending. So we just move on, and we keep it very light. Even the dark stuff is light.
Yeah, I kind of love that Desus Mero's like ability and willingness to like be really funny and candid about things without feeling a need to like explain. Like we covered this story of Trump covering or asking for the John McCain ship.
Dinghy?
Yeah, the John McCain schooner, is that a kind of boat? To be covered up while he was there, and like the commentary on Trump on the show was limited to like, oh yeah, Trump. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was the Jared Kushner interview where he was talking about. It was the same story though, as we ran it, and the whole commentary on Trump was like, oh yeah, Trump's dumb racist though. Like, and that's like so refreshing to just be able to do that. I think they feel no like obligation to like hear people out when they've run out of goodwill with the people in the news, not Desus Mero.
Yeah, my favorite thing that Desus says about Trump is that Trump doesn't have very, very good songs. He only has a couple hits and everything else is trash. Mm-hmm. And so just approaching him like that, I'm so healthy.
I'm coming from also like my previous job. I would sit and watch documentary footage and like weep softly in my office like several times a year. That was like part of the job. I remember, this is truly, you guys will think much less of me as a person, but one of the hardest days I was, and the topic, I mean, like, mass shootings are so hard because people expect you to talk about it but there's nothing funny to say. It's like just repeated horror. But I was working on a story about opioid addiction and like pharmaceutical proliferation of high strength opioids. And I was watching like it was a documentary with footage of like a support group of guys who are trying to get clean, or clean is judgmental, but trying to stop using opioids in rural Maine. And they were all fishermen. And I remember one guy said, they were like, when did you start using, and what brought you to these pain pills? And the guy went, my legs were crushed by a lobster boat. And I remember laughing and then shutting my computer and going home being like, I'm broken. This is something snapped in me and I need to restore it with sleep and love and petting my dog and kissing my wife, because apparently my empathy muscles were cramped and it was very bad. It was like I looked into myself and was like, I do not like what's in there.
I watched that documentary too.
Yeah.
We did something on the Sackler family,
Yep.
and I also watched that horrible documentary. Don't recommend. It's upsetting.
Conversely, someone writes, what has been your favorite episode or moment working in late night? And sort of sub-question, do you have any stories with famous people?
My favorite was when AOC came on the show for the premiere, because to me it's like Desus Mero, AOC, they're all from the Bronx, and it's like this Bronx renaissance in this country, and it's like this one epicenter of culture is like spreading throughout the nation, and to see that in Technicolor from entertainment and then politics in one space is like very powerful. And famous people, Lil Nas was great. He has great skin, man.
We had Pete Buttigieg on the show, who is just a delight. And we got to do a segment with him that was previously done with Obama, which was Slow Jam the News, which is just a delight of a segment generally. But basically, for those of you who haven't seen one, the candidate sort of gets an opportunity to present a little bit of their policy, and then Jimmy, accompanied by the Roots, slow jam it. So they make it really slow and really sexy, and they have lines like, yeah, Pete wants to satisfy all your needs. And it just, it goes in a whole series of really crazy directions. And it was a really fun challenge, because not only were we working with his actual policy and those sides of it, and then also writing the most ludicrous jokes in these very weird, I can't believe this is my job moments. But then we were sitting with Buttigieg's campaign team, sort of talking out different things about, well, he'll say that he wants to satisfy your needs, but he won't call it, he won't say Peter Piper's packing a big pickled pepper, because big is too suggestive. And we said, okay, what if it was just a pickled pepper? And we really just delved in there. So if you're wondering what goes into a presidential campaign, that was a pretty surreal moment.
One really gratifying moment this year, our gratifying episode, I think it was our third episode of the season, where we started with, it was like a long segment on the R. Kelly interview. So the episode started with the R. Kelly interview, which is like really unsettling, and I think a lot of people found it very like difficult to watch. And the commentary that the guys made was like so funny and deft, and like looked at the issues without bringing people to a painful place, it felt like. And then right after that, we did a segment about Momo, the fake hoax of like that statue of a chicken that tells teenagers or children to kill themselves. And there's this deep, dark story about R. Kelly and the abuses he's allegedly perpetrated. And I say allegedly to cover my own self, not because I don't believe it. And then there was like this moment where they showed the statue of Momo that like was this viral hoax that was like, kill yourself, children. And in unison, Desus and Mero went, does Momo have titties? And it like made me laugh so hard. And also, I like predicted that in a meeting that would be an area of interest for the show. Like, does this suicide statue have huge boobs? And it just like felt very like the ground we covered over a period of 10 minutes was really. It felt really good, and it felt really natural to be able to do both those things. And then that was also, they made up a song with John Legend about a sex thing that I don't need to rub in your faces now, but you can Google it. It's really funny.
It was called Chocolate Galaxy.
Mm-hmm. So, if you don't know, why are you at a comedy panel? If you can't intuit what a chocolate galaxy is.
I had to explain to Terry Crews what the movie Swim Fan was. I wrote a joke with just name-checking Swim Fan, because have some respect, and I won't explain it's a movie. And Terry Crews was like the nicest person I've ever met. We don't have a ton of celebrities on the show. We occasionally have them on to do like little sketches, and he very politely was like, what is that? And I was like, sir, it would be my honor.
I don't have any really celebrity stories, but there was one bit I was proud of. I did with a chat with Desi. I wrote with another writer, Lauren, and it was about all the female candidates running. It's like record number of female candidates, and we looked at how the press is covering them and how the press and media have covered female candidates historically, and just how it's usually generally pretty shitty. And so Desi's chatting with Trevor at the desk about it, and there was one thing where they used like the term vaginal politics in something like years ago. And so we wrote a joke for Desi being like, vaginal politics makes it sound like we're like actually voting like with our vaginas. And like, yes, I can hold a pencil with mine, but like, and then I pitched this like line that I didn't think Trevor or anyone would let be on the show, that after that, Desi looks down and talks to her vagina and she's like, yes, I know you're hungry, we're almost done. And I was so proud, and like Trevor and our head writer, they were like, I mean, yeah, we'll try it, we'll see if it works. And they did it, and it killed, and I was like, I'm so proud to work for a show that lets our correspondents talk to their vaginas. Like,
You guys have any?
I mean, I guess we occasionally, when we go live for like election nights, you know, sometimes our guests will want to come and be like, oh, can we sit with the writers while they write? And I think that they think that it's very funny, but it's really just a tense room of 14 people very quietly typing on their MacBooks, not talking to each other. So I think watching Hugh Laurie be disappointed in his experience was very fun for me.
Do you have any?
I occasionally get to do stuff on the show with an old friend of mine, and I feel like that is probably any time I get to do that. My friend Amber Ruffin, we're friends from like 13 years ago. We met when we were both just slogging it out in our 20s trying to do comedy, and it feels like so much of this job can be so thinky and analytical and like looking at facts and trying to bend facts into a setup for a joke or try to find an angle you haven't already heard or read on Twitter. And so every once in a while I get to do something in person with her, and it feels like when you're connecting with an old friend, it kind of feels like a lot of that gets to fade away, and for a minute you just get to the core of the fun. And it feels like in this current political climate, sometimes the core of the fun can be hard to find. So sometimes it's a delight to be like, there's one time I told a joke that just bombed so hard, but I was like sitting next to Seth, and there's like 200 people, and then I just like added a tagline onto it that wasn't in the script because I just thought, well, this will make Amber laugh. And I felt like that's all that mattered at that point.
So the last question is sort of two. I'm going to merge them. What advice do you have for people who would like to share their work but are terrified of getting in front of people / are generally embarrassed? And what advice do you have for 16-year-old aspiring comedy writers? This is the advice section of the questions.
is that 16 or 60?
One person's 16. I don't know the age of the first person. Let's say 60, but really would like to share their work.
I think if you want to share your work and you're worried about it, the most important thing to remember is whoever all of your favorite comedians are, if you think about all of the jokes that they've written that you love, for each one of those, there are 1,000 that were terrible. You just didn't get to hear them because they wrote them and then were like, okay, not this one, and they kept writing. So like the people that you like that are good, but because of practice and repetition, like anybody who goes to the gym all the time is gonna get swole. But is that the word the kids say? Thank you, Ziwe. I have approval from Ziwe. But I feel like anybody who goes to the gym a lot is gonna just have big muscles because they work the muscles over and over again. Anybody that you admire and look up to was where you are and has thousands of terrible jokes on their hard drive. It's like so many, and they're so bad. And so just don't worry about it. Like, you're gonna be great, your jokes are great, and they'll get better the more you do it.
And it's okay to feel that way. And it means that you care. It means that, like, if you're scared and you're nervous to put things out there and you're sweating, like, it means that you care, and that's good because you're doing something you care about. Like, when I started this job, we had, our first big 2-week hiatus. At the end of it, we're about to come back, and my husband came in. He's like, "What's wrong?" Because I was crying, and I was like, "What if that was all the jokes I had? What if I used it up and now I'm empty? What if I had a finite amount of jokes in my brain and that was it?" And he was like, "It's not how anything works." But like, that's, you'll always have that fear, and that's good, but don't let it stop you. Let it drive you to punch through, and then the success will be amazing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about like dark days when like something horrible was happening in the news, but sometimes everything's going perfectly in the news, and you get in and you're like, not working. Like, come on, go. I mean, you can start small. You can just like send something to one friend and who you trust, or your mom or whoever, and be like, or your mom, don't send it to your mom. That's the opposite of who you want, giving you an honest opinion. But I think that like starting small with sharing, you can't get better without a community. It's tough to find one, and that to me is one of the most important things, to find people who like the things. But if you're 16, the best thing you can do is watch a bunch of stuff and see what you like. Everyone decided what they wanted their voice to be by cobbling together the things that they loved the most. And so watching a bunch of stuff that you know you're gonna like, that you're not sure if you're gonna like, and kind of thinking about the mechanism. A lot of people talk about when they're preparing for packets, they'll watch a show and they'll literally write out, they'll transcribe the monologue to see what it looks like on paper. Like, oh, this host does this kind of setups, or this host, count the jokes. Okay, 80% are about politics, 20% are about, what else is there? Oh God. But there's a research element to it that it's working and it doesn't feel like working, and it just takes time. All of us kind of started, I think, at different. Had done a different amount of things before we got into late night, but I had a similar breakdown, early into my job, where I was like, I've had such a freelancing, I hop from job to job, that stability felt wrong. I was like, I have health insurance. What's happening? I'm supposed to be scared all the time and worried, and you learn how to transform your own voice based on your surroundings, and so it'll pass. You'll move through the fear, and then you'll get scared about something else. Some other horrible thing will occur to you that could happen, and then you'll confront that. Does that help?
I think some of it is also just about points, data points, having more things out there. We were sort of talking about this backstage, but the less you can live or die by one thing that you have out there, the more confident you're going to be. And I think that some of that is about putting out something that's not your A+, but it's your B. And I'm sorry I'm using school terminology right now, but I do think that some of it is just about you're going to have jokes that are in the bottom half of the jokes you've ever made, and that's okay too. And
the more jokes you write, the less you'll care if one is bad, because the percentages of the pie piece is smaller.
Exactly.
I think as a young writer as well, it's really hard to be yourself, because you see all these people successful being themselves, and you're like, well, if I do it like this, then I will have this as well. And so finding your voice as a young writer, making sure you're trying to make yourself laugh first and foremost before you make anyone else laugh, is so crucial and so important. And writing so much, that's the worst advice you ever get. It's right, that sounds so easy and so hard at the same time, but it's honestly you just need that the most, is writing a lot. And if you're 16 and want to get into comedy, I'm jealous. I wish that I started so young. Go to lots of shows, do improv, do stand-up, try everything, and you might hate everything, but you'll find something you like.
Yeah, I think everybody was right, and yep, okay, time's up, I guess. Wow, okay, sure, yeah.
They silenced a white man.
Yeah.
And that's because time is up.
I'm with her. I'm with her. I'm with her.
I think just making stuff you like and showing it to people, and that you might not. I think it's a really great painful feeling is looking back at stuff you did 2 years ago that you were this was dope, and then being humiliated by it, and it's such a good feeling, because you're I've grown so much that I don't hate present me, I hate past me, and that's I think that's the highest level that I've achieved of self-esteem, is feeling good about me now and hating all the me's in the past, all the Kurt Vonnegut me's trailing me throughout time. I'm just those guys suck. I wish I could jettison them forever. Future me, that's the guy.
Last chance. Any more advice? All right. That is the panel. Thank the panelists. Thank yourselves. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. Thank me.
Jesse.
All right. Bye. See you later.